In, looking good. All right, so Doug, whenever you're ready, go right ahead and get us started.
Alex Gallego, founder and CEO of Redpanda. Welcome to the Insight Jam.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is something I've been looking forward to because the truth of the matter is when we talk to enterprise technology CEOs, and it is mostly enterprise technology CEOs that we're talking to, they're mostly older, and they've followed kind of a little more long form path. But you are very unique. Talk a little bit about before we get into your journey, which I want to get into. Talk a little bit about what the opportunity is for Redpanda right now. I mean, why is Redpanda raising $160 million, $63 million? What is the market like about Redpanda, and what's the market opportunity?
There is a fundamental shift into how enterprises are building applications today. And in that, there's this migration away from how the world has been built for the last, ever, where you would punctuate your business in this discrete timelines. And let me explain in different words. You would say, hey, let me run a report of how many sales did I do for the day at midnight, so that when the CEO comes in the next morning, you would say like, you made whatever, $10,000 or $5,000. And most business processes almost to date has been this classic, what is known as batch processing, which is like you wait for a group of things to happen and then you run a report and you make some decisions and then you wait for the next 6 hours or the next 12 hours or the next 24 hours. And there is a fundamental shift where people are now reacting to every single event that is happening through their infrastructure. And so an example is we took a credit card company where you would go and you would introduce your debit card in the bank. And at the end of the day, they would send that person an offer based on some credit limits or profiles like, oh, hey, you qualify for this particular credit loan. Would you like to accept it? They got some like minor conversion rates. That's a classic, batch processing. Then they moved to, they're like, oh, maybe if we tweak it and we run it really fast, maybe we see an improved conversion. And they did. And so they now run it at the end of, at the end of the hour. And so you would go in and you still, move away from the ATM. And then at the end of the hour, you would get an email. But then when they moved to real time, when they started leveraging this technologies like Redpanda, the second that you insert your debit card, all of the context is there and it says, would you like to accept this withdrawal as a loan? And they saw like a 3,000% improvement on credit loan acceptance. And like, that's fundamentally the shift, whether, we can give example whether like, that's how Uber is built for their ride sharing. There's a system that looks like Redpanda. Or whether, for some of our customers, which are the largest banks, where you need to keep order between debits and credits of your checking account, and that order matters and at a scale is really difficult to do. So fundamentally, Redpanda is helping these data-intensive businesses and software engineers build the future by giving them new tools to reason about every single event that is going through their network, rather than the alternative, which is like, this group of events, all of your sales at the end of the day. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I'm curious. So is that being driven? Do you think that's being driven by business development, the marketing department, the growth folks, or is that being driven by the IT infrastructure people? I mean, who's saying we need to move that time shift into that consideration moment?
It's usually users like you and I will demand user experiences that transitively in infrastructure software, it looks a lot like Redpanda. The classic example is almost inconceivable today to think that Visa or MasterCard, my credit card, you would get a credit card transaction from a Nigerian prince. I think everyone on this call would have gotten maybe thousands and thousands of those emails. And like, you're just, that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, just like that kind of credit card transaction doesn't happen anymore. And so there was that shift away from being able to merge multiple signals. Hey, what is the point of sale of the vendor? That had to be real time. What is the creditor score of the vendor? Does that vendor have a good reputation in the system? Where's the IP address that this is coming from? How do I contextualize the data? It's like did Alex take a plane and can I track it via the airports, right? And so actually at a scale for these financial organizations, the problem is really gnarly. I was obviously trying to give a very simple example, but ultimately users are demanding these real-time interactions, and transitively at the software infrastructure, enterprise, B2B kind of business model, it looks like Redpanda. And so you could build a TikTok on top of Redpanda, which we powered. An example is ShareChat, which is the largest social media in India, 390 million monthly active users. And that's all powered through Redpanda. Or you can power a Twitter, you can power a credit card company, you can power, anyways, the largest fraud detection company and so on. And so like at the end of the day, you and I and users will demand the best user experience to be able for those companies to be competitive in market. And then that looks very much like the software that Redpanda sells.
And so is that a call that you're getting? So are you getting these major inbound opportunities where somebody has kind of unearthed Redpanda as a potential solution to their lack of being able to meet that customer requirement?
Well, yeah, largely. And the way enterprise software has changed from a purchasing procurement process perspective is that engineers have a huge weight in the ultimate decision of what software gets adopted. And so the way we've gone to market is we have focused largely what I tend to say, which is true, is that my job is to focus on making the hero of the story, the engineer, builder, hands-on keyboard, actually making product reals. And if that person is successful, will be a major financial success. And so the way we've gone to market is we focus on the developer experience. Like, are we solving a real problem? Do they care? Is this something that they need when they think about when their business or whatever their manager, ultimately, however, that builder gets the requirements, they're like, okay, you have to build real-time fraud detection as an example. The first thing that they do, they'll go on Google, they'll go on GitHub, they'll go on like developer communities, and they'll just adopt Redpanda that way. And then they actually are successful. And so we have a free version of the product where they don't have to pay us any money. And some of the world's largest companies are actually using Redpanda's free products. And so as a go-to-market, we can then mine that pool of highly qualified people that are successful in productions, that are using us for business critical, as if Redpanda crashes, their business stops making money. And so usually at that relationship, they trust us, they trust the software. So when we come on a sale call, it's less like, oh, hey, let me sell you this new widget that, is purple as opposed to red. It's more like they trust that the things that we're saying are true because they've seen it in production and they want help. And so it becomes this consultative process rather than perhaps, more classic top down, like, hey, you have no idea who we are. Let me have a different conversation.
Yeah. So I'm older than you by quite a bit. And so I've come from that classic buy cycle approach, sales heavy and awareness heavy, and longer sales cycles, quite frankly, I would wager. But I'm curious, are you seeing a shift because you've kind of moved through this a path similar to what you were just saying? You would have been the buyer, I guess, more likely than not on the other end of this thing in a previous life. Have you seen a shift where organizations are now changing the way that they're buying than more of that top-down, bottom line driven approach? I mean, because like you said, things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, I think there's like three conversations that must happen for Redpanda. And I think as an infrastructure companies, it's even true for our public competitors, public companies that are in the container space. It is the same sales motion. And so one is that, growing up as a principal engineer, and we'll talk about that later, that's like I had a pretty direct impact, but ultimately I couldn't sign the check. My job as a principal engineer was like, hey, I need to make sure that technically the things that I'm building, I'm going to show up to the architecture board and I'm going to say, this is the laundry list of reasons of why this happens to be the best product with the team that we have, blah, blah, blah. And then, typically would involve a manager and your executive buyer. But there's one more, depending on the way enterprises are consuming the software. And so the three personas are, one, the operator buyer, so the person that's running the system that is not writing the software. Typically, the user buyer, which is like, okay, I have to write software against this system, but what I'm demanding from it is like, I care less, I still care, obviously, but I care less that the system is up or the TLS certificates are installed or that's like the operator, right? Typically the SRE team or the DevOps team will do that. And then we have the executive buyer. And I do think that most companies today that are selling infrastructure companies, so like databases, message queues, tiered storage, data warehousing. So if you look at, Snook or Databricks and some more successful companies than we are, it is a very similar purchasing cycle, right? Like perhaps less Snow and more Databricks, where it is more sophisticated, technically speaking, users. Then you have a more complex sales cycle. It doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, longer. It still is enterprise, still like 6 to 9 months sales cycle for most companies. That's still true for us, but it's not 18 or 24 months. On average, it's 6 months. And the reason is that the end user, Alex in a previous slide would have already qualified. So the POCs is like an hour. They're like, a day. They're like, this is already running in production. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, we trust you. I just need to make an introduction to my VP of engineering, who is actually going to make the purchasing decision, and an introduction to my SRE team to make sure that they know how to run this in production. So that's the fundamental shift.
Yeah, no, and I think there's other shifts happening as well. In particular, the shift to the cloud, which again, having run solutions review over the last 12 years, when we first started, there was a lot of resistance to the cloud, and there were a lot of it was almost unheard of that people would be putting their data in the cloud at certain organizations. I think there's probably still a little of that resistance. However, not nearly the same. And it's my theory that decision makers who had that resistance are cycling out, and the decision makers that are moving into their places are way more comfortable because of their experience moving through cloud solutions their entire career with moving data to the cloud. What do you think about that?
There's two different user journeys here, and we have both customer fronts. And so I only spoke to perhaps the larger classic organization, Fortune 5000. Even for those companies, landing ACV of like 160,000 and above, maybe a few $100,000, $1 million. Really, the sales motions tend to be pretty similar. You may start out I want to talk about the product-led growth in a second. But at the end of the day, to unlock significant growth potential in an account, you have to have those relationships with those people. It is like, it is really difficult. No one is going to give anybody else $1 million by just walking in the door. That just doesn't happen. You have to have this personal relationship with the folks that are relying on your system to run their business. But you're right in that, I grew up with the cloud, right? Like when I went to school, we all used the cloud. And so there was like this shift for adopting what is known in the market as a product-led growth. And the idea here is that you focus your marketing channels and your sales channels to land on a self-service usage-based billing. And the key to that I think was missing for a long time is the ability to scale to zero. And so developers simply need to have the access to the service in a way that they can try it in like 60 seconds on their laptop. Right? They want to go in, one click login with their GitHub credentials or their Google credentials. They must be in the product, getting value immediately. And when they log off, and if they don't use the product, then it's $0. And they use it. And so that's actually a relatively complex piece of technology. And in terms of users, we just launched that 9 weeks ago. In terms of like users, which is expected, right? It is like an order of magnitude already larger than the number of late, stage enterprises that we have. But, very low dollar amounts. And that's okay. It's just a way of establishing trust with the buyer.
I'm sure your investors are thrilled to hear that the pipeline is filling up that way. Because ultimately you do need to be able to scale that out. There does need to be that. So we'll get into your journey specifically, but I think it's fascinating just the founding of the company. It was really you as I understand it, you kind of building something that you wanted to use yourself, having come out of the developer side, yeah?
Yeah, so prior to Redpanda, I was a CTO for a stream processing company called Concord. We sold that to Akamai in 2016. I became one of the youngest principal engineers in that company. And, I was struggling and the teams that I was helping with in trying to process the internet. Right? Like actually the internet, like Akamai at the time was processing 70% of the non-video traffic for the world.
They're right down the street in Cambridge. Yeah, no, I know. They something.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal company and a huge market opportunity for them. But really, it was just me trying to understand, like, why not? Like, where's there such a gap between what the hardware could do and where the software is today? And so I left Akamai in 2019, but prior to that, I have proven some ideas out. So I gave a talk in 2017. I was like, this is how the world is going to be fundamentally. There's a big shift in how the software that is being used for the things that Redpanda is used for, from a decade-old ideas where the clock tick was the spinning disk that we all had in our laptops, that it was like clunky, it made it super hot, it made all this like AOL dial-up internet noises, and you're like, I don't know what the computer is doing, but it must be like, it's doing something, it's just making all these weird noises. Into now, this laptop has a hard drive that is 1,000 times faster. And so that was the first insight is, if you were to start from scratch, what would you do differently? And sometimes you're lucky enough to reinvent the wheel when the road changes. And the fundamental insight is that the complexity shifted away from the spinning platter into keeping the CPUs busy, right? So this computer I'm calling in from has 128 cores. That was like mind-blowing to even think about this 20 years ago. And sometimes I still feel that it's still slow. And so that was the fundamental shift, right? Like disk is now 1,000 times faster. And so I wrote Redpanda for me. It wasn't intended to start a company. Frankly, it started with a bunch of rants on social media that I was like, hey, like, why is the state of the art so difficult? Why is it hard to use? Why is it so slow? Like, hardware is so good. Like, we should, where's the gap? Where it's like all of everything in between hardware and what a user sees is like largely artificial complexity, right? So like, it is not essential complexity. And so that was the original focus. And so I wrote it. I wrote a couple of blog posts. And then 5 of the world's best companies in the world, like one of the world's largest CDN, one of the world, largest electric car company, largest like ISP in Europe, they all started using this in production. I was like, mind blown. I was like, okay, this is a real company. But I really wrote it for myself, to be honest.
It's a great story, and honestly, it's not a typical enterprise technology story, at least not a modern enterprise technology story. But I think it's fascinating because it starts to tap into where we're headed, and a little bit more about what's possible. So I think you're probably seeing this at the molecular level with your customers, where they now have processing power and access to speed and possibilities that is leading them to want to develop solutions that will benefit the customer, but are ultimately going to be limited by the constraints that they have around securing their data, keeping their data secure. Would you say that's kind of where folks are winding up, particularly in the enterprise, right? There's this need for data security, even though there is all this incredible horsepower now in the hardware.
Yeah, and there's this is like, if talking about trends, I mean, when I want to talk about this idea of data planes in the enterprise network. And so I want to talk about the movement away from what has been this classic software as a service, where as an engineer, you sign up for a software as a service product, let's say, Snowflake or whatever. You go in, you get a connection string, and you're like, hey, to send data from my corporate network to Snowflake, I want to set up a encrypted tunnel, and then I want to send the data, and that's roughly it. That's not enough. Because what enterprises miss is this idea of sovereignty. And sovereignty is an order of magnitude more difficult to achieve than privacy. So privacy is a checklist. They're going to take your name and your social. They're going to scramble the social security number and encrypt the data address. It's just a checklist, right? SOC 2, Type 2, HIPAA compliance. They're like, largely the security team is like, you just need to be HIPAA for us to do business. You just need to be SOC 2, Type 2 for us to do business, and so on. But sovereignty is much more difficult to achieve. And it says the customer owns the hard drive lifecycle in which the data actually lives. And that, we coined the term in streaming. We called it bring your own cloud. And we're the first company in the market to bring this idea where you divorce the control and data plane, but the data plane lives inside the customer's network. And the control plane lives in the cloud. It's kind of like old school. Some networking companies had done this, but it wasn't in the data intensive space. And now that's here. And it's like because of new cloud APIs. Does that make sense?
I'm excited to hear you say that because I've believed for a long time that individual people's data has a real value, and they have been giving that value away. And quite frankly, enterprises have been reckless in managing that valuable data from their customers. I mean, just the incredible amounts of breaches and hacks, and I do believe that that there should be a shift where people become this idea. I mean, talk a little bit more about this idea of sovereignty. I love this.
At the core idea, there's a fundamental idea of a shared responsibility principle. This is different, and I have to get into a little bit of detail because at a high level, everything looks like a function. It's like, well, you have an input, a black box, and an output, and it's not really interesting for the listeners to like describe it that way. And so the next level of detail is that classic enterprises that had thought of this idea of a split in the control and data plane, they required enterprises to open up a bunch of firewall rules. It was relatively complicated to set up. And about a decade ago, a bunch of security companies came about and they're like, hey, instead of opening up ports, let's invert the flow of information where the user deploys an agent inside their network so they control everything. Applications connect to that agent, then the agent connects to the outside world. But there's no firewall rules, so it is like as secure as it gets. And more fundamentally, enterprises have a single kill switch, which is they publish one firewall rule that says, block cloud.redpanda.com, and their applications remain working and operational. They don't experience outages or downtime, even if they cut off obviously you don't get more updates and more software security, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that you make the user 100% in control. And so now this thing is only possible because of new cloud APIs. And so in particular, the rise of a shared computing infrastructure like Kubernetes, where now you can take the same application footprint and deploy it on Azure, deploy it on Google, deploy it on Amazon. Like by and large, there's still actually quite a bit of caveats in the details for the engineering team, but by and large, like your application will just mostly work across cloud, which is great. Now you have multi-cloud. And the insight here is that, hey, with this agent, you give the user a full audited list of commands of what the software could possibly do in your network, right? And Amazon in particular is sort of leading the way here, where they lean into this idea of multiple projects. So you have both ambient security permissions. So you bound the box in which the software gets to execute. That's the first step. 2, the customer is in total control on when and how the software stops receiving updates or like what the vendor can actually do. And that whole thing is audited. And 3, which is where sovereignty comes in. Like those are just checklists in order for the CISO of a large Fortune 2000 company to feel comfortable for you to deploy software in their environment, right? But then the last one is the real result. The result is that a user has sovereignty. And so now they have the best latency possible, best speed against their applications because it's co-located with their code. They own the hard drive lifecycle. So if at any point they have a dispute with the vendor, they like click it and they keep all of the data inside their network. And so that's the critical piece. Those other technology pieces are the how you get there. But the result is that the enterprise owns the data. And that's a shift that I'm seeing more and more, especially with younger companies. And I think older companies are struggling with that. In fact, our main competitor doesn't offer it. And what you give up, there's a real trade-off, right? This isn't like all rosy colors. I don't get to make up a 30% surcharge on Amazon instance cost or whatever Amazon services that I'm using underneath the covers, which is a real margin profile for some of these public companies, right? It's like 30% margin on top of this base services. But the idea is I'm going to charge for the value the software delivers, not because I'm like wrapping a bunch of AWS services. And so that's a pretty big shift in how people think. Philosophical shift, actually, at its core of like, I'm not going to charge you for just whatever. I'm going to add 30 cents to every instance hour from Amazon. I want to charge you for just the value that I deliver. Does that make sense?
It does. And in fairness, you're leaving my my skill set a little behind. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because I do want to talk about some of the recent announcements that have come out with regard to hardware and future technology, and how that will begin to impact these types of data relationships. Specifically, both Microsoft and now NVIDIA have come out with what they are referring to as AI PCs, where they're really talking about moving a lot of things to a local hardware a lot of the technology to the local hardware. Is that, am I reading that correctly? And that will fundamentally start to change the way we're accessing the internet, networks in general, and potentially data across enterprises and customers?
What we have seen, I'm closer to the enterprise side of the house, right? So my customers tend to be the Fortune 5,000. Those tend to be the people that we tend to talk to. And so I'm not as close to the user component of AI as much as I am, I guess, transitively through them I am. But where I feel more authority to, like, based on real customer conversations, is on the large scale, gnarly enterprise. And so there are three pillars for how I am personally seeing enterprises reason about AI. And so one, where we are today in the maturity cycle of trying to learn if these technologies are even useful to the enterprise, whether you're running fraud models or whatever, you're like changing ads automatically. Those are the things that are making money, or you're making the next prediction on the next trade. Those are the kind of customers that we tend to serve. And so for them, the first is building a connectivity system to the world's best models. And so a best model would be a GPT-4o, a Gemini model, a SageMaker, and so on. So like you Perplexity, Mistral, right? So those are the top APIs and models in the world. And the way developers are consuming these models is you're sending data to the models. That's just where the world is today. And so we just bought a company about 4 weeks ago. We launched it last week. Today, actually, was when we finally announced it. And so we bought the largest connectivity portfolio for the Kafka API ecosystem. And the idea, like a core thesis behind it, is like this technology is going to help our enterprises connect to the world's largest AI APIs in a way that is easy, right? Because it's undifferentiated, it's not that interesting, it shortens their time to cycle. I was like, look, you're frankly not going to be a better business by developing glue code that is going to send data to OpenAI. That's not where the alpha is. The alpha is you take the output of that and you make your product better. It is not in the code that is just the connecting tissue. That doesn't, it's undifferentiated for everyone. So that's where our acquisition kind of came in. But the idea is you send data to the model. The second step is really a subset, is for what is known as fine-tuning. And so there's this huge growth of these open source models. An idea, one would be Llama 3 trained by Meta, where for most businesses, you don't need a general model. Like, you don't need a model. If you are in ad tech, you don't need a model that knows about how to be a carpenter or how to be a plumber or how to, just like unclog a faucet. It's just like entirely wasted knowledge and training, right? And so I was like, okay, let me take this really sophisticated open source model. Let me fine tune it for this specific business task. And then you can get a ton of value. And so the fine tuning, just Redpanda the way it is, we don't have to do a lot of work. That's how people are leveraging today in production. But the last one is perhaps contrarian to how most people believe AI will be leveraged, which is it is simply cost prohibitive for the enterprises that I talked to, which is the Fortune 5,000, to send all their data at line rate, right, as it's coming in on their firehose, to this very sophisticated models like, GPT-4o or Gemini or SageMaker or Perplexity or Mistral, all that. That cost structure would be impossible. Like they would, bankrupt every single business. But the alternative is true. The alternative is you can take a model, fine-tune model, and you can ship it to the data. Now that's cost effective. It's at least, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more cost effective, which simply means at the end of the day, more business processes will be able to leverage that AI. And, I think it's contrarian, and I'm not sure why it's controversial. It's just like dollars in. It is impossible to send your data to OpenAI.
There's a lot of scaling questions with regard to AI in every direction. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I'm always keen to get somebody who started out in kind of the classic path to where you ended up. You started out as an intern as a tech intern, right? And then
exactly.
You were coding and junior coding, and then you've moved your way all the way up, and then you obviously have written an incredibly successful implementation, and away you go. You started a company, and now you're having great success. That is the classic path. What do you think about this idea that through agentic AI and effectively just raw horsepower, you can begin to eliminate layers of developers where there basically won't be a bottom rung anymore for people coming out of college?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. Even personally, I've used some because of the companies that we get to talk to. Like I have access to companies that are using Redpanda to build the next code completion, which is it's doing this service to the magic that they do behind the scenes. But really, they use Redpanda as a way to train and run their models or whatever. So sometimes I get access to some of those models, or I get to see previews of things that have been unannounced just because of the data space that we are in. To me, it's going to be as big of a change if it continues to be in the trend as cloud was really for the world, or some other major innovation like the phone, the cell phone,
the PC, the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's this big, innovations that happen, and it's obviously the sum of all these incremental things with the right market timing, right funding, right energy, right? We have renewables. There's a bunch of things that had to exist before for us to be able to leverage AI. And so in particular, as I think about how I grew up writing code, which frankly, it's not sexy. It was my first job was actually SSHing into a mainframe computer. OpenVMS was the operating system, right, in C++. And Emacs, using Emacs on a terminal, to the point that it became such a muscle memory that when I wrote Redpanda, I literally started on a terminal with Emacs and GCC. It's those basic tools. I had real competence in those. And so I was just wow, when this is how I'm going to build the system. But as I'm now the CEO, so I don't have a lot of time to write code, but on the weekends I may play around with projects. And what I've seen is it is phenomenal, the loop, the feedback loop, that the time to error detection in particular, or good patterns, is it is a way to codify the mind hive of what tends to be the best practices for not just for this programming language, but for this specific framework in this specific way that I'm using it, whether it's an HTTP server, and I could just use the world's open source software to train this machine that tells me, oh, by the way, if you change your code in this seemingly superficial way, it actually has a 90% performance impact. Or if you, instead of copying a memory variable, you get to reference it, and now you have 100x improvement. There's this minor things. I'm obviously exaggerating the impact here to drive the point, but there are these subtle ways that will have a tremendous impact. And what that translates is smaller teams will be able to build billion-dollar companies. Maybe it doesn't take 200 people like Redpanda. Maybe it takes 25 people. Or maybe it takes 10 people or something like that, or maybe whatever. Even a team of 5 will be able to build technology that will continue to advance the world in meaningful ways. So for that, I'm pretty excited.
It's incredibly exciting, but I think on the flip side of that, it may well be incredibly disruptive. I mean, there are a lot of people right now who are developing code, and I think we hear it certainly at Solutions Review that there is a genuine concern that people who have very good jobs in IT may not be able to maintain those good jobs, and there is a whole host of other jobs, analysts and so forth, that just won't be able to compete with the raw horsepower and speed of analytics, and it no longer is an art as much as it just is a pure science. And I'm wondering what you think about that, or have you given that any thought in terms of the kind of societal impacts of what AI might bring?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if like my brain is smart enough to understand the ethical impacts. And so if we remove ethics and focus on the technology opportunities, I have given that more thoughts. It's just such a difficult topic to discuss. It's like, it's too large to talk about, where it's like regulation and ethics, and like, how do we think about it? And is this like derivatives of art, or do we need to go and contribute and pay the original developers that led to the training, or like attribution? There's just like a really large set of problems. But
well, I think all those are already almost all out the window. I think this is going so quickly.
Yeah. But I would say, most people had like this, I guess there's two camps here. There's people that have like a doomsday's look
it's
on
not so
it.
much a doomsday as it is. It's just, because ultimately we may end up in a utopia where you don't have to work all that hard, just because there's just all these assistants that can get things done. But there's definitely going to be a societal impact that I'd like to ask folks about if they've given it any thought, because I think it's inevitable.
In my experience at least, and I had I was lucky enough, I took classes with some of the founding members of the internet, people that literally wrote like the TCP/IP congestion algorithm for the internet and so on. Early first computer systems. At that time, there was a similar outlook on the world. And what happened at the time, it could be different this time, is that people became more productive. It was not the replacement of, but the usage of A. It was not A or B, it was A and B. I still think now, from like where I sit, which I do get to talk with some foundational model companies, right? Companies with over like hundreds of millions of dollars training the next generation. And so perhaps a little closer than most people, but not the model company. So maybe they have like the next vision in their head where they need to be. I still feel it's so far from being, anytime close to AGI. And largely, I think where people get a lot of lift is in services. Like, I would wish AI would do my laundry. There's a meme going on the internet. I was like, I don't want it to do art for me on my computer. I want to do art. I want it to do my laundry. And so there's still, I think, a pretty big gap in practice from the things that it could do. It's like, it's some AI answers are insane, right? They're like, they hallucinate. It's like a big issue with AI. They hallucinate like this entirely believable story. And so I still think, even with the latest models, in practice, for people using this for real production, money generating revenue use cases, it is not that great. It's good, but it isn't what like this very narrow use case demo videos that all these AI companies put out. Those are real things, but in practice, and like as we see it permeating through every aspect of life, I still think there's some time to get there. Now, this thing's advanced so fast that maybe I'll eat my words in 3 years.
It's a 386 chip. I mean, it's the IBM 5150. It's like it goes. It's the Mac 1. I mean, we're at early stages. But I'm curious because I have a couple of kids who are in the work world. I have a daughter who's just getting into college. And will soon be joining the work world. I'm curious about your take on what they should be thinking about as they begin to move their way through their career. So talk a little bit about your path and some of the decisions that you remember making that had an impact, that you made consciously thinking, I'm going to go this way rather than this way, and things kind of went from there. I'm curious what you've seen.
I guess I make a first comment on the first part of the question, which is what I also look for in executives joining my team. And so as it relates to like AI, and then I'll share the story and some decisions that I think don't recommend for the general public unless a very specific set of conditions. I want to get to that. But I want to hire problem solvers. I want to hire people with what I call intensity. I think other leaders call them grit or whatever, right? Like there's multiple ways of dividing the world. Some people will get things done and others will come up with legitimate excuses, like real things, right? And so if I'm not sure that need is ever going to go away. Like you need people that are going to be able to decompose this like, very difficult to think through gnarly ideas. Like, how am I going to compete with a $10 billion company and $1 billion in their bank account? Somehow you have to like break it down and get it down to the details so that you can solve one small problem that allows you to bootstrap your idea and your business. I'm not sure AI is going to give you all of this steps, right? There's just some like grind and work and obsession on the things that matter. And so being able to figure that out, I think that'll always be a forever useful set of skills. And okay, maybe programming won't be the classic, the way programming is being taught and computer science is being taught today. Maybe that's going to have to change, fine. But the core principles of this like problem solvers will remain true forever. Like I'm not sure that's ever going to go away. It's just a way of understanding the world in a way that allows you to make progress and just not get anxious or, doesn't allow you to get drowned in a cup. You're like, somehow there's going to be a way, and like the job is to figure it out. And that having that personality trait, that level of intensity, and perhaps a little bit of confidence that you're just going to go figure it out. Like you don't know, but you're going to go and figure it out. First principles thinking, that will forever be there. And so it's kind of hard to say what's the impact on programming in particular. And then on the story around how I grew up and some decisions that I made, I think luck played some role in where I am today. I grew up in a small poor town in Colombia. This is where the coffee is made from. It's called Manizales. I guarantee you, if I was there, my zip code remained that, I just simply wouldn't be here. If I hadn't moved to the West Coast, I simply wouldn't have access to the world's best venture funds in the world, to the subculture, in particular around San Francisco, California, that allows me to go and recruit a very senior talent from Meta or Google or whatever, or Pinterest or like a Dropbox. It doesn't matter. Just like pick your favorite tech company. And because they've had friends that were part of the early rise of these companies, they're like, hey, I want to take a bet on myself. And I already have some savings in the bank account. And recreating that subculture doesn't exist anywhere else. And so I do think that luck plays some like role in where it is. But for most people listening to this podcast, or like they're already there. And so but it's important to caveat like that the advice doesn't apply to everyone. And I think some of the things I'm going to say would be terrible advice for people that were just following this blindly, because I was like, no, you're going to end up poor and on the street, and like, that's bad decision, bad zip code. And so the last thing, some perhaps controversial things, is that when I went to school, I had no idea. I went undecided, but I happened to get into the honors program in my first semester, and my advisor was a computer science advisor. And I was like, I'm going to go do that. And I loved it. I like was the first person to go to school, and I just like, I don't know what, first person to go to school in my family and in a totally different country. So it's like, I had no idea, legit blind, just like dumb luck at that point. And I like landed with Susana Garcia, and she's like, hey, like, I advise the computer science. You did well in this class. You should like try to take a couple more programming courses. Like, a great idea. And then, I ended up majoring in it. And then it was this idea of why not me? Like, why can't you be the MVP? Why can't you win? And that came through tech conferences. I met some people that you read on the books that would be very easy for people to have this hero image of them. Like they built the early TCP protocols of the internet, or they built some famous programming language. And you meet them and you're like, man, these people are not smarter than my friends. They're smart, like I get it, but they're not smarter than my friends. And so that realization was a huge shift. And I just decided to take bets on me. And in other contexts, this advice would be terrible. Like, don't do that. Like, you have to pay your bills. And like, I didn't have young kids at the time. And so there's like a lot of caveats to this answer.
Yeah, no, I think there is a certain binary decision that's made, to either, it maybe not go so far in a risk pattern as to put all of your worldly possessions on the street, but this idea of having a level of conscientiousness about how you're going to go through life, and that being recognized by others, that reinforcement that you then get from those folks, I think provides you with the confidence. I think it's hard to be confident if you're not getting some level of feedback from other people that you're working with.
Yeah, and in school, I skipped a bunch of years. For context, I skipped 3rd grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, and a semester of school, some of it by luck. And so I've had a bunch of positive feedback before that I was like, that helped me get a little bit of confidence to get started. And then you get a win and you're just like, you protect that like all ideas, frankly, are so fragile in the beginning. Like if I had met someone that I looked up to, even in the beginning of Redpanda, and I really like looked up to, and they had like trashed the idea, I'm not sure I would have started the company, right? It's just like trying to protect your ideas because they all sound dumb in the beginning. It's just like the idea of going up against a $10 billion company with this thing that you wrote in your Miami apartment sounds stupid. It's just like, why would people do it? But protecting those things and having a little bit of confidence goes a long way.
It's great. Everything starts at zero. I mean, when you wrote your first blog post about, when you wrote your first line of code, the everything starts at zero. When we started Solutions Review, I mean, your end game is to conquer SEO, but you begin by writing a single post that nobody sees. It's the loneliest day ever.
Totally.
But you believe you have a vision, and you can see further down than obviously where you're at, and you continue forward even though the feedback is non-existent. It's I think it takes a certain mindset to be able to see that path in Technicolor that other people don't see at all.
Yeah, and it's useful when I remember I wrote the first blog post, and it actually didn't get picked up. I wrote my second blog post and I got 50,000 views. And then my first blog post, because of the first one, got like 10,000. So it was like 100 views or something like that. And I just like, whatever, I'm just writing this for me and my friends. I sent it to a couple of friends. They sent it to their friends. And like, but I still got like 100 views. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, it's neat that I think that at least it reached out this many people. And then it hit a social media post and it got like 50,000 views. And like, you start to protect those moments. Like you're like, you have to celebrate the I think in retrospect, those were great wins. But when I was living through those moments, I was like, oh, this is a dumb win. It's just like, whatever. It's a good blog post. But I was like, no, those are the things that you have to like latch on, just the good moments, because everything else is so hard. It's just like hiring people is really hard. Going up against an incumbent is really hard. Building a company is really hard. 90% of the people tell you your idea is dumb. And you're just like, well, okay, maybe this version isn't as dumb as you thought.
Well, and truth of the matter is that you have to start. You'll never be successful if you just sit there and make up excuses as to why you can't get going. You have to throw down and start, and that sometimes is just the hardest thing. But once you start, if you do have that grit and that conscientiousness, you can't let yourself down. If you know what I mean, you almost are kind of responsible to yourself at that point, and everybody else kind of takes a secondary position. You almost feel at least how I felt anyway, that like, I'm just not going to quit. It may not work out, but it's not going to because I quit early.
There's no backup plan. I was when I was fundraising the first fundraise for the company we've done a few since. There was like, what's your backup plan? I was like, I don't have a backup plan. That idea of a backup plan has never existed in my mind. Like, maybe it's gonna fail and then like in a spectacular way. And but like this is it. Like there is no backup plan. There's no alternative. That's
right. There's gonna be no ammo left. It's fire everything you got, and yeah, let's see what happens. So I wanna actually, it's my understanding that you worked at a company that was acquired by Akamai, and now Akamai is a customer of Redpanda. Is that how I understand?
Yeah.
So before we kind of wrap everything up, walk through that story if you can and don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm curious because that's a great story.
When I started Concord, I was working at an ad tech in New York, competing against Google, and so I had a great job in working in embedded databases for a company called Faxit. And then the CEO of this ad tech company is like, hey, basically, I was young. It's like, I want to almost double your salary in a year. Plus, it's like 180% increase in your salary, and I had college loans. I was like, this sounds great, and I'm going to give you a team, and we're going to compete with Google. I was like, I mean, this kind of sounds insane. I should have asked more questions. It was a great experience, and we did win. And I grew up super fast technically because the company was scaling with the world's best publishers, New York Times, Forbes, Reuters, MSNBC, and the world's top brands like Nike, Rosetta Stone, all the top brands. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, frankly, this software that I had just written 2 or 3 weeks before with obviously a small team. And so that blew my mind. And I left that and I started running what eventually became Concord. So in 2016, when we eventually did sell to Akamai, the context is we were just 3 poor kids from Brooklyn, New York. I migrated to the US when I was 15. I went to school here and I had like a good job. And so I saved a little bit of money and I was just working on Concord nights and weekends. And then we launched the company. My roommate at the time, her name was Shinji. And I was like, hey, you want to be a CEO? Because I still want to code this thing. She's like, sure, that sounds like a great idea. That's actually how the company was formed. And we were roommates working at this ad tech company. So we started the company. No one knew who we were. They didn't know like nothing. And it was, in many ways, it was life-changing for me. It's just like, okay, I get to pay my college loans. I have, a little bit of money left. But more importantly, looking back, is that it put the brand of the work that I did in the open for people to say, Alex is able to produce technically excellent products. So that carried forward when I was at Akamai. And I was working on some of this system for securing the internet, which is actually now one of our customers at Akamai. Is actually the unit that secures the internet is one of our customers. And when I was there, I did good work. And so the manager that I left, I actually sent him an email. I was like, hey, I'm starting this new thing. And he's like, yeah, I love the work that you did. Like, you have a good reputation in the company. We dealt and we started testing, and the software did exactly the things that I said it was going to do, because I value my personal integrity quite highly. And it's just like, we don't lie, we don't cheat, but we're going to do everything in our power to win. That's kind of a big part of cultural pillar at Redpanda. And so they ended up using it, and it's been this like phenomenal journey for me, and that I'm like seeing my friends that I work with use the software that I'm using now while I'm running Redpanda. It's just a great relationship. They're great humans, they're friends. And so I actually have the cell phone of some of those people that we connect outside of work related things. And it makes me personally, it's just a joy to be able to help in a meaningful way change how the internet is secure, actually big parts of the internet as it exists today secure, and that the people that are running that are friends of mine. So that's like a win-win for me.
You mentioned culture briefly, and I'd love to get one more question around culture and how you're thinking about culture at Redpanda. So, obviously everything changed during the pandemic, and I think one of the major changes that happened from the pandemic is work from home or hybrid or remote or however you want to think about it. But there is a loss now for workers who will no longer be able to have organic conversations if they're not in the office with folks and really make meaningful friendships, but also make meaningful innovations based upon random things that happen. I mean, we've had more than a few conversations around here where somebody gets an email from a customer or something, and all of a sudden we start ricocheting that around a conversation, and next thing you know, we're kind of off on another idea of how we might be able to deliver a different type of service, and we never have that, and you can't recreate that properly in a virtual meeting. So I'm curious, what are kind of the cultural tricks that you're using to kind of keep your team connected and able to find that kind of magic innovation dust?
Connection has an inverse relationship with efficiency. And so, like, the more efficient you are, the less time that you have for connecting truly deeply as like friends or humans. We struggle with, we don't have everything figured out. We've only figured out some things, and I'll share those. But it's important to say that we too struggle today with the young in-career people. And so for the ADR team, which is, the account development reps that are calling customers, usually cranky engineers, pick up the phone and you're like, hey, would you like to talk about Redpanda? Those people, they need in-person vibe. Like it's a really gnarly job. It's difficult. They're like a core pillar of how we're able to expand to the largest enterprises. And for those people, I simply could not figure out how to do it well remote. Me, Alex, I know other companies do it, teach me. Like, I don't know how, but for those people, we open up an office in-person office for the young in career, so the commercial sellers and the ADRs. Because when we tried, we just weren't capable. We had like ones and twosies in terms of success, but like at a scale, we didn't have any success, and those people turn in the company. And I was like, okay, so we have to change. Either we pay people more money and hire more senior people, or like this is just not something that we could do. And so on the engineering front and the R&D front, we haven't had a ton of success to date on those early in career people. And so what we've done is we just simply pay more and hire much more senior talent. And what we found is the more senior you are, like by the time you have 3 kids and a wife, and you're like a principal or a senior, like you just kind of want to be left alone because you know what to do.
Is baked in.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're focused, you're dialed in, you're not checking anything. Like you've done this for a long time. You typically a lot of the people that hire really enjoy what they do. And so they most is like, hey, they're great. Like it's very easy to work with them. And then it's this in engineering, it would be like L1 or 2 or 3, right? So right out of college, all the way to like a young senior talent, like senior 1 engineer. That we haven't done well in engineering, and I do think in part is because we don't have this in-office experience. But what we've done is we fund in-person activities, and so once a year, the whole company gets together for a full week, and we just hang out. And there's a keynote, there's a couple of things that people are doing, but people want that coffee experience sometimes. And so you just have to, fun activities where there's like regional meetups for engineers in the Bay Area, maybe a regional meetups for the engineers in the UK, or maybe like sellers get together in Phoenix or whatever, right? There's like, people already do this without us really getting involved. We have a group of 5 people in Colombia, just kind of get together on Fridays, hang out at a coffee shop, and they just like, they're hacking on their laptop. It's a cool kind of fancy coffee shops. It's quiet, it's internet, and they just hang out. And so people crave that. I think what they want is the flexibility. And so we're still trying to figure this out. And the best way is just fund activities that allow that coffee conversations. Like, hey, how's your kid? I didn't know that your kid was into tennis or soccer or football or pickleball or whatever it is. And it's like, oh, my kid is 2 and he's this age. And you're like, you connect at a different level that isn't pressured by productivity, where like that's where, productivity and connection do stands at complete opposites. And the more efficient you are, the less connected you feel.
Yeah, this has been great. Alex, I appreciate the conversation, and we're incredibly excited to continue to track and follow all that Redpanda is going to be doing over the next several years. And obviously, the next several years are going to be an amazing time in general across all of enterprise technology. So best of luck. And thanks again very much for the time today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.